Cross Question. On our panel tonight, we have Catherine West, Shadow Foreign Office Minister and Labour MP for Hornsey and Wood Green. Robert Jenrick, the former Conservative Cabinet Minister. He's Conservative MP for Newark. James Brittain-McVey is lead guitarist in the pop band The Vamps. And Andrew Pearce is not a lead guitarist in any group, but he is one of our leading presenters on LBC, as you know. And also, as if that wasn't enough, consultant editor of the Daily Mail too. How do you fit it in? I do not know. 0345 6060 973 if you'd like to ask our panel a question. Only one space on the board at the moment. You can nab it if you dial now, and you can watch us on Global Player 2.
Call 0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850. Cross Question with Iain Dale. This is LBC.
Well, welcome to you all. Let's go to our first question. It's from Alex in Watford. Hello, Alex.
Good evening, Ian. Good evening, panel. I'll try not to do an Iain Dale tonight and get emotional. So here's my question.
Yeah, it happens. I'm a right blubberer.
Right. Does the panel agree history has repeated itself? The new Winston Churchill of the Western world is President Zelensky of Ukraine.
Andrew Pearce.
Look, he had a shaky start when he was first president, and people thought he wasn't going to last. They thought he wasn't up to the job, but war had becomes him. He's a brilliant orator. He's inspirational. He's brave, courageous, in the same way that Winston Churchill rallied his people. And it's a very close similarity, because the Germans' strategy, particularly in the Blitz, was to try to bomb the spirit out of Londoners and our cities during, that great Blitz spirit prevailed, and Hitler didn't triumph. Churchill was brilliant. He was inspirational, but let's not forget what happened to Churchill at the end of the war. He was chucked out in a landslide defeat, and he, of course, was completely shocked by that. So I'm not sure if that will happen with Zelensky, but he's easily man of the year, isn't he? Time magazine man of the decade.
I would have thought so. And Robert Jenrick, there are parallels to be drawn here, aren't there? Because, of course, in the early months, when Churchill became Prime Minister in 1940, his main aim was to get America to come into the war, because he knew that it would be difficult for Britain to defeat the Nazis on our own. And of course that happened after Pearl Harbor in 1941, and he immediately went to the United States to talk to Roosevelt. Now, the priority of Zelensky has been to draw NATO into the conflict, hasn't it? Now, he hasn't succeeded in that yet, but again, he was talking to the American Congress today. He's been quite tenacious on that.
He has. Well, today, I think he was the first foreign leader in a wartime setting to address the joint houses of Congress since Winston Churchill. And so that parallel was very clear. And he quoted from Roosevelt and drew parallels with Pearl Harbor. So he explicitly made that reference today. I think, as Andrew said, he's a tremendously brave individual who was underestimated by many people, underestimated by Putin as well, who thought he was dealing with a comedian, a lightweight politician. That wasn't true. And I think the decision to stay in Kiev and not to leave, which many people might have done, lesser leaders might have done, has proved to be absolutely essential in rallying the Ukrainian armed forces and maintaining morale. And never underestimate the importance of morale. Clearly the Russian troops seems to be very low, and there's a very real prospect of the Russian army collapsing at the moment. And a lot of that, I think, stems from the leadership that Zelensky's been able to offer.
Catherine.
Oh, he's the man of the moment. He really is. It's been such an amazing 3 weeks, and deeply frightening, but also really inspiring. So, and I'm just pleased that he has been able to use his wonderful communication skills to inspire a sort of a joint response, because it's so common to get the splits early on. But instead, everybody, who's right thinking has been really firm. And, I think just this week I've just been feeling a tiny bit more hopeful that, the goodies might win, because Mr. Putin is a very frightening individual. The way that he's acting is just brutal, and I just hope we can continue in
Do you see the parallels with Churchill, or is it too easy to make?
No, I do, because he was a great communicator, and I feel that Zelensky had done his homework, hadn't he, when he spoke to our parliament, both Shakespeare and, the hint to Churchill, but also today, which I haven't had a chance to catch up on, but I know from reading tweets and things, Pearl Harbor, trying to really press those buttons. So he does seem to have understood the way we think, and that's what a great politician does. They can understand and communicate. I think he's very impressive.
Now, James, I know you like your politics, but you're probably not as politically geeky as the rest of us.
A bit armoured up, but
when you look at Zelensky, what do you see? What do you make of him?
Well, I think it's really interesting. A lot of people, I don't think, had probably really ever heard of him, especially people my age until recently.
I hadn't either, by the way.
Okay. And the fact that he came from a comedic background, and he was seen, I think, as a bit of a joke at the start, but this transition and the fact that he stayed in Kyiv, I think it's really commendable, and I see Ukraine as the Vietnam of Russia now. I think, they've shown such grit and determination. I think Putin thought he'd take Ukraine in a couple of days, and clearly hasn't. And I think Zelensky's going to be someone that's looked back on for generations of a sign of true leadership, for sure.
That's a really interesting parallel, isn't it, Robert? Because we all know that you can conquer a country, but can you then control it? And the international coalition in Iraq, led by America, they had a military victory, but they couldn't actually control the country afterwards, just as the Americans couldn't control Vietnam.
Well, we don't know how this conflict's going to end, but I think we know enough now to say that Putin is very unlikely to win this war. He's not going to be able to subjugate 40 million people. He's not going to be able to control this country, if that was what his original objective was. Whether or not this will continue to rumble on for a very long period of time, with huge loss of life and almost irreparable damage done to the country, remains to be seen. But there is at least a victory in the one sense, that it's very clear that the people in Ukraine do not want Putin to install a puppet government, and it seems very unlikely that he'd be able to do that now. I think the point that you were alluding to earlier about whether he's managed to draw in NATO and the West sufficiently is an interesting one. That's the point that Tony Blair made in an article the other day as well. And there I think he hasn't gone as far as he would have liked. He's clearly managed to get the attention of the West. He's managed to get very large amounts of defensive weaponry, and we need to keep piling that in. President Biden today announced even more. He's not managed to persuade us to do the no-fly zone, which I know for many Ukrainians will be very disappointing. I think that's probably the right decision for the West. We don't want to escalate this conflict into a full-on European war. But there is a danger, I think this is the point that Tony Blair was making, of an escalation trap, where we're so obvious about the limits that we're willing to tolerate before we would get involved, that we give a green card to Putin to do almost anything up to that point. And on that issue, I think we do need to be a bit more careful and nuanced about the language that we use. For example, on chemical weapons, not to stand back and say that we would automatically do nothing if that happened. I think we probably do need to leave Putin guessing as to what we would do if some further very dangerous escalation occurred.
I think that's really interesting, because what I found very odd is how the President of the United States keeps telegraphing in advance what he won't do. So Putin knows exactly what he won't do, and he's done it again and again. And he also, foolishly in my view, said he would accept a minor incursion. What is a minor incursion? Is this a minor incursion? Probably. It's a full-scale offensive. And I do think it's all, when you talk to some of the generals, they say, why is the...
Well, it's the point Tony Blair's made today,
exactly.
Isn't it? Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, I think it's going to be a challenge for NATO going forwards if we telegraph that we're not willing to take any action other than if, God forbid, a toe cap was placed over the border into our own territory, when NATO actually does have a history of taking action to support those who it has a duty to protect. And so I think we do need to have much more careful language than we've seen from President Biden.
James, can I ask you about the generational aspect of this? Because older generations will have experienced the Cuban Missile Crisis. My generation experienced the sort of nuclear threats in the 1980s. And it's really, I think your generation is probably the first that has never really had to think about a war until now. When you're talking to your friends about this, is it something that is provoking a degree of anxiety?
Well, I studied history for my A-levels. That was the last education I did, and Cold War was my focus. So for me, this is, I would argue the Cold War never really ended. So I'm not surprised by this. If you look historically at, well, Soviet Union leaders and later Russian leaders, their sort of Iron Curtain has always been something they want to try to claw back on. So I wasn't surprised by this, but I think the fact that the majority of people my age don't know the history, I think they see that, I mean, it is alarming and tragically sad for everyone, but they see it as a huge surprise, and I think they think that it's an easy solution. Oh, let's just start fighting. They don't understand the ideology difference between the West and Russia. I get, I heard the other day from one of my friends and their kids, sort of like 5 years old, that are crying, thinking that we're all going to die in a nuclear war, which is terrifying. But I think it's easy to just jump to conclusions. Okay, we're going to sort this by doing this, A, B, C. The reality is this is historically a huge issue that's not just going to be resolved. Even these peace talks that are happening now, brilliant, and hopefully we can, get some peace. But I can't imagine that's going to last for long, because at the end of the day, Putin wants to reclaim that sort of buffer zone against the West, and he's going to carry on doing that no matter how many peace talks we have.
Catherine, just on this generational issue, I mean, what, in your discussions with, do you have kids?
I do. One of whom is a great fan of yours, I have to say. Yes.
Bless him.
Oh, that's made his day.
Yeah, absolutely. I love the flattery.
Yes.
You can come back.
But they're both obviously very worried, and I think clear communications are crucial, and sometimes that's the trouble with laying all the cards on the table. However, on the other hand, that's been the strategy from the start from the US, and I think in another way it's brought all of us together much more, because we know exactly what is happening. Because sometimes the security people say you mustn't talk about this publicly, whereas they've done the opposite, which is Biden has said we believe there is going to be a war. This was at the same time that Putin was telling his best friend President Xi not to worry, of course I won't go to war. And then they signed that big memorandum on the basis of that, and he lied to his best friend. So I think
it's never a good idea, is it?
So I think the strategy of actually laying the cards on the table, where there might be a little bit of nuance around that where it hasn't worked, on the whole, it's been a brilliant strategy, because from the start we have been able to say, well, if this is going to happen, then we need to get very committed to whatever we can do to support. And even though, I'm one of these people who, back in the day, your age, was probably a bit sceptical about some of these, the NATO and, more of a C&D-er, etc.
Were you at Green and Common?
No, not quite that old. But then I can really see, I do feel that
put me in my place.
A C&D should be looking at, reviewing its position on NATO.
Yeah.
Because it has actually worked.
And Stop the War Coalition might do that, but then pigs might fly.
I know, of which quite a lot of your colleagues are still associated with Stop the War, Catherine.
I think
coalition.
wanting peace is a good thing, but I think sometimes the way that gets translated into a letter or something just doesn't work. And particularly right now, where we need to put aside some of the things around the edges, because let's face it, a lot of that is built on some of the failures that were in the Middle East wars. We now need to see that this is a very clear choice between Putin's approach to life and our approach to life, and we can't be arguing around the edges at the moment.
Right, we'll take more of your calls and texts. If you want to text a question, if you can't, call 84850 is what you need to text. It's 8:15.
LBC. leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale. Tweet at LBC.
18 minutes past 8 on LBC. Let me reintroduce my panel to you. Catherine West is here, Shadow Foreign Office Minister. Robert Jenrick, former Conservative Cabinet Minister. James Brittain-McVey is not a former anything. He's a current lead guitarist in the pop rock band. Do you like, is it, I keep saying pop rock band. It sounds like popular music beat combo, my lord, doesn't it?
Whatever you want.
Well, how do you describe the band, the kind of music that you do?
I wouldn't say rock, though. The pop band, the play instruments, yeah.
And Andrew Pearce, LBC presenter and consultant editor of the Daily Mail. Right, our next question is a text. It's from Alistair in Norfolk. He's unable to come on air as he's driving an HGV. Keep your eyes on the road. If I'm one of the approximately 12,000 Afghans sitting in hotels around the UK, am I not justified in wondering why I'm not able to move in with one of the thousands of refugee-ready Brits and let the arriving Ukrainians take my place in the hotels? We fled the same things to the same place, but are not being treated the same. Robert Jenrick, that is quite an understandable point of view, isn't it?
Yeah, I think that's a pretty valid point, actually. When I was involved in the Arab scheme, which is the one that perhaps your caller came over to the UK through, which is the interpreters and those people who had explicitly served the UK in Afghanistan. And the aim of that scheme was to get people into the country, into temporary accommodation, and then into homes, either social housing or the private rental sector, as quickly as possible. It sounds, from what I can hear, that there's now quite a significant delay in getting people into the private rental sector or social housing. We always knew that there was next to no available social housing in the country, and the private rental sector, as anyone knows who's trying to rent a home at the moment, is also very hot. So I think that's proving very challenging for the government. The scheme that Michael Gove announced at the beginning of the week is, I think, an attempt to respond to those difficulties and say, well, if local councils, particularly in some parts of the country, like urban areas, Catherine's is probably one of those, has a lot of people in temporary accommodation in those hotels, then let's throw this open to the public and civic society, where there's clearly a lot of demand, and ask them to step up and provide the housing, which seems like a very sensible way, rather than just laying more and more of a burden on local authorities when clearly they're struggling to keep up. But if we do end up with tens of thousands of offers for Ukrainians, which cannot be satisfied, now we don't know if that's the case because there's millions of Ukrainians who've currently left the country and are in neighbouring countries like Poland. But if we can't satisfy that, then absolutely, I think it sounds very sensible that we ask those people if they'd consider taking an Afghan instead.
But isn't there a missing link here? Because people are invited to register on the government website if they can take people in. But how do the people either in Ukraine or already over the border, how do they signal that they're coming to the UK and they want accommodation? Because I don't see any similar website for them, so they can actually be matched.
Well, I mean, I'm interested in this. We've been discussing it as a family, whether we'd like to take part. And actually, in the last few days, I have found that there are sites, and new sites are coming on board almost every day. So a number of well-established charities are creating sites. My family are Jewish, and so there's a Jewish refugee council who have created a site that you can sign up on now. It's a very large Jewish population in the Ukraine. There are charities.
Such a Nazi country, isn't it?
Well, that's.
I mean, seriously.
Of the many outrageous things that Putin has said in recent months, the idea that this is about.
But he's Jewish. His prime minister's Jewish.
Has to be one of them. But no, in answer to your question, I think you will start to see more charities and organisations creating those sites. And it does also ask all of us, not all of us will be able to answer this, but it does ask us, do we actually have any links with the Ukraine? And more people than you might imagine might have them. My wife, for example, is a lawyer. And when we were debating this, she remembered that she had worked with a Ukrainian law firm in the past and is now in email contact with them. And so there may be more people who can find individuals than you might imagine as a result.
Okay. Catherine.
I think the strength of the programme is that from an English language point of view, your English would come on very quickly. And that's a sort of condition for working, isn't it, to have English language? So I think there's, real benefit right there. I think the matching system is a bit of a test run, because it does feel a little bit as though it's a wing and a prayer. But I also feel that if people are happy to take a refugee, they may well be happy to take an Afghan refugee. We do have to remember that, as an average, there are more families with a lot of small children coming from Afghanistan, whereas I think from Ukraine it tends to be maybe a single parent with 2 or 3 children, so they're quite large
family men between
units.
16 and 60 aren't allowed to come, are they?
And that's part of the reason, I think, why local authorities are sometimes finding it difficult to find the right housing for Afghan families, because sometimes if you have quite a lot of children, it's difficult to find the number of bedrooms which is affordable.
The allegation
the situation may also be different in that it's fairly unlikely that a family will return to Afghanistan. We hope that many of the individuals who come over from Ukraine will be able to return. And, in some cases it may be relatively quickly, in others it may be years before, sadly, they're able to return. But I think there are different expectations of these individuals.
Andrew Pearce, the allegation is that, of course, Afghans are brown people, Ukrainians are white people, therefore they've received different treatment. Is that too simplistic?
It's not, and I've heard people saying it, and they've said it on my show too. But the fact
you have a show.
We'll see. But the fact is, Ian, what's happened in Ukraine, it's the biggest refugee crisis since the Second World War. It's Europe. We could be going to Ukraine on an EasyJet flight or a Ryanair flight, so it feels almost like we could be there on holiday or home. It's much closer, and we're seeing these extraordinary images of Putin bombarding these wonderful, beautiful towns and cities, which is why people have just risen up in huge numbers. And we didn't see that in Afghanistan, and the Afghanistan conflict has been going on for years and years anyway. And to be honest, I think people, frankly, putting it bluntly, were just a bit bored by it. Whereas this has really touched a nerve in a way I can't remember since I've been alive, and I'm 60, and I've never seen anything like this, and we're all very moved by it.
Yes, I just said one thing that is different is that in most of the refugee schemes we've done in the past as a country, we've worked with an organisation out in the field like the UNHCR, and they don't actually come to the UK until a local council has already found a home for them, has the beginnings of the wraparound care they might need. What we saw in Afghanistan, in Kabul in the summer of last year, was unusual in that there was a sudden influx of individuals into the country, and local authorities did an amazing job but found it difficult to cope with that. If we were to take hundreds of thousands of people from Ukraine, which is potentially what we're about to see, I think it would be difficult for local councils to take them immediately and then struggle with them in hotels and temporary accommodation whilst they try to put them in safer and secure accommodation.
James?
I think the difference here is, Ukraine's enemy is shared with us. Since the 40s, we've been sort of sceptical of Russia. I think the reality is, Afghanistan's desecrated from what the West has done, and Russia before that. But look what we did there. I think it's very different, and I've seen a lot on social media of people saying, "Oh God, these Ukrainians look just like us," and it's terrifying that people are just jumping to that. I think also, it's valid to say that there is a real threat from Russia against us, and there's perhaps not in Afghanistan in the same way, and sadly that's why we're acting in this way, I think.
I wonder, Catherine, whether you think that this should have been done quicker. That seems to be the major Labour attack line on this, that, it should have been done more quickly. But then you think, the invasion only happened nearly 3 weeks ago now. To create a scheme like this is a bit like furlough and COVID. It has been done comparatively quickly, or do you think they should have had a sort of off-the-shelf scheme ready there and waiting?
I just think that there hasn't been much learning. As they say, is the Foreign Office and the Home Office a learning organisation? And I don't think they are, because, it was only last August that we were debating about how it hadn't been handled well, and yet it does appear that the same mistakes have been made. And also, it's not just comparing it to Afghanistan, it's comparing it to other countries in our neighbourhood. So, Ireland has a population of 5 million people, and yet they have taken many more than the UK has. And I think people can easily read from your newspaper, pick it up and look at the figures and say, I'm feeling generous, so why isn't my government taking action in that tone, in that regard? And I noticed that the Home Secretary's been absent all week. So I don't know whether she's about to
What
get
conclusions
reshuffled.
do you draw from
Well, I
that?
just wonder whether she's going to be shuffled off
We
because
always
she hasn't.
speculate. We always speculate.
She
but I
hasn't
mean,
had a great week.
She-
She hasn't had a great war. Whereas, in an otherwise commendable piece of work by the Defence Secretary, for example, you can't help thinking, and defence isn't easy. So
You do wonder if the government's been slightly behind public opinion. 'Cause you just got to think. You mentioned my newspaper. I think that my newspaper's appeal has now raised £8 million. It's staggering. In 3 weeks. That's Daily Mail readers who people often say, oh, they're ghastly, Brexiteers, racist. They're doing that. And we're getting lots of letters and people saying, we want to have a family in our spare room.
James, I think, it shows the best of Britain. We are all, when these crises happen, we always seem to be the country that donates most, whether it's the government or whether it's individual people. We should shout about that a little bit more, don't you think?
I agree. Andrew, do you know, was that for the Ukrainian crisis?
Yeah.
The money, how did that compare with the Afghan crisis?
You should be doing my job.
I don't know, actually.
Because I'd be interested in seeing that.
We did an appeal, but I can't remember. But this one was always going to be bigger and more successful because of the immediacy of what's happening so close to home.
I'd be interested in comparing those.
Right, we will move on and take more of your calls and questions in just a moment. It's coming up to 8:30 on LBC. I'm Iain Dale. Lottie Morley has the LBC News headlines.
Boris Johnson says the release of Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe by Iran was the result of a great deal of UK diplomacy. The British-Iranian national was arrested in the country in 2016 on spying charges, which he's always denied, and will arrive back in the UK this evening. US President Joe Biden has called Russia's Vladimir Putin a war criminal. It's reported the Kremlin have called the president's comments an unacceptable and unforgivable rhetoric. The US has promised to send $1 billion worth of weapons to Ukraine. President Biden has pledged an extra £800 million and will send drones and anti-aircraft systems. LBC weather, clear for most tonight with the odd shower in the northwest, a low of -2.
This is LBC.
To help
Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC.
8:33 on LBC. Catherine West, Robert Jenrick, James Brittain-McVey and Andrew Pearce are here. Now, James, you got married recently, didn't you? And you've adopted your wife's surname as well, which is very modern.
Well, it's funny you mentioning it because I'd sort of forgotten that I signed up to that. So I just am James McVey again, which every time I do this sort of stuff, I'm, yeah, that is me.
Yeah. Well done. Right, let's go to another question. It's from Alison in Streatham. Hello, Alison.
Good evening. Good evening to you and to your panel. I just wanted to ask, because it's been on my mind as the mother of teenagers all day, whether or not it is ever right to strip search a child in school.
Well, this is the story that we covered earlier in the programme, and indeed last night, about the 15-year-old black girl who was subjected to a strip search in a school in Hackney. I talked to Diane Abbott today about it. 4 police officers went to the school, 2 male, 2 female. The parent wasn't called, and she was subjected to just a gross humiliation. And she's now, apparently, according to her mother, traumatised and self-harming. Catherine, let's start with you. It just seems incredible that police officers can act like this. And, of course, we always say, well, it's not all police officers. It's an isolated incident, but there are a hell of a lot of isolated incidents at the moment.
It's also that there were so many occasions on which to stop this. I mean, how common is it really for 4 police officers to arrive at a school to do an investigation? There must be protocols around how you interview, a 15-year-old in a correct way. And in a school, you would expect a child to be protected. Apparently, she had her period, so double humiliation. And then, as Diane has said, this must be investigated, and we need to get to the bottom of how on earth this could have happened in 2022.
Because, Andrew, my thinking is, look, there were 4 police officers there. Wouldn't there have been one of them who said, hang on a second, is this protocol?
I know, and is it wrong to say, and 2 of them were women who you would have thought would have been sensible, but they were the ones who conducted the search. And
well, thank goodness that happened.
Yeah, but nevertheless, you'd have thought that at least one of the women would have thought, we can't do this. This could be my daughter. I think it's truly shocking what's happened, and it's another indictment of the Metropolitan Police, which has completely lost its way. And we know after the murder of Sarah Everard and various other things that have been going on in the streets of London, women have a big issue now about safety. They don't trust and respect the Metropolitan Police the way they used to. And this sort of incident will make it even more difficult.
James?
I think there's definitely a race element to this as well. There's an adultification of black men and women, children, that happens all the time. There was a case in America where a 7-year-old boy was playing with a toy gun in a park and got shot by police. But I think, I was asking myself today, would 4 police officers force a white 15-year-old girl in a private school to completely strip? I can't see it happening. And I know people have been blaming teachers, but I think, we've been ingrained to believe that whatever the police say is right, and you look up to them as upstanding, and a lot of them are, obviously, but I think there's clearly some deep-rooted issues in the police force if stuff like this is happening. And I'm glad that it seems that things are being done, and there's an inquiry into this. But it's a shocking headline that you don't expect to see in 2022, do you?
Quite. Robert?
Well, I don't think I have anything to add, really. I thought it was absolutely disgusting, and the more that I've learnt about it, the more disturbing it is. As you say, the fact that there were 4 officers present, the fact that, as far as we know, the teachers at the school didn't prevent it from happening. Hard. I appreciate that's a hard position when police officers are doing it. It's deeply worrying, and as a parent of 3 young girls, I would obviously never want any of them to be put in anything approaching that situation. The wider concern is the one that Andrew raised, that from the polling that's been done recently, trust in the Metropolitan Police, particularly amongst women and younger women, it is falling and is at a very concerning level now. And so something needs to be done.
Have we got to the point, and maybe each of you have a brief comment on this, have we got to the point where the Metropolitan Police Force should be abolished and we should start again? Because I think that the trust in particularly the Metropolitan Police, I mean, I'm sure it may be similar in some other areas, but let's stick with the Met. I think it is at an all-time low, and I wonder whether it should be reconfigured in order to make people more confident in it. Robert, what do you think?
Well, I don't know what that would mean in practice. I mean, it's certainly an unusual force because in addition to having to handle all law enforcement matters in London, it also takes on a series of very significant and often controversial national responsibilities, providing policing for the major events, the security of politicians of the royal family and counter-terrorism and so on, although invariably those things are happening in London, so it's difficult to divorce the two. I do think that this is much bigger than just a single individual, and when Cressida Dick resigned, although I think that was probably the right thing to do, it was, this is not about one person. This is a major institutional problem, and whoever comes into that role is going to find it very difficult to reform the organisation.
Andrew?
Well, I think you may have a point, because it's just not working currently, is it? And you would have thought, Robert says it's not about one individual, but Cressida Dick is the first woman Metropolitan Police Commissioner, and it's on her watch that this precipitous fall in competence from women has happened. So I think they do have to go back to the drawing board right from scratch, because it's really worrying. We never see a police officer. You never see a Bobby on the beat. I know that the Home Secretary, Theresa May, got rid of 20,000 police officers. They're beginning to put them back, but you don't see them. And I think you should, because that restores a little bit of confidence in
James?
I think tragically this is a bigger issue than just the Metropolitan Police. I'd imagine that I grew up in Dorset, and I imagine that there's been a shift in opinion of the police force down there since these cases. So I don't think just changing the Met Police is enough, and that's terrifyingly sad. I don't know what the answer is. I agree with Robert as well. I don't know what that would look like. But I think a new police commissioner that maybe takes a nuanced approach and really tries to go at these issues for people like my age and younger. I think that might be some form of contribution to changing this issue.
Catherine?
There are three things that need to happen.
And we should remind our listeners that your constituency is in the Met area.
Yes, there are three things that need to happen as soon as possible. The first, of course, is Priti Patel, and the Home Office hasn't shown much leadership on this, I have to say. Has to choose, together with the Mayor of London, a really good new leader. Secondly, we need to recruit more Met police officers who look like the community they serve. They have been promising to do this since 2000. 22 years later, it's still broadly made up from youngsters who come in from, outside London to serve, and I don't think that's a good strategy for recruiting.
What are the
officers.
proportions? Do you know?
It's tiny. It should be between 15 and 20%. Black or ethnic minority, and yet it's increasingly people who can afford to still stay with mum and dad in, Hertfordshire or, the home counties, come in on a day-to-day basis. It's because London's housing is so expensive. And the third thing that we have to do, we have to improve the training. If you are going to Hendon College, Police College, for 6 weeks or 12 weeks, how can you ever hope to have a really in-depth understanding, particularly if you're not a Londoner, and you're told to go into a school and find whether there's any drugs or weapons on that 15-year-old individual? You might just do it because you might think that's what's expected of you because you don't know London. So I think that there are three things there that need to happen immediately, and I would love it if the Home Office took a bit more leadership on this, and also if they stopped cutting the budgets back so that all the police stations have to be closed. Since I became an MP in 2015, we've lost Muswell Hill Police Station, we've lost Hornsey Police Station, and then we've lost a number of others right across that North London belt, and we've had all these mergers. So, we are now merged with Enfield. Enfield and Haringey is a massive area, covering 5 or 6 MPs. How do you get that level of accountability right with the borough commander if you're having to share this individual with 6 other MPs? So, there's a lot there, and it all sounds a bit dry and technical, but if you added it up, it would be a proper plan for reforming the police, because Iain is quite right to say that what is really chilling about this, and what went to the heart of all of us, was when Sarah Everard thought she was doing the right thing by getting in the car of the police officer. She thought she was obeying authority, and it was at that point that the trust just snapped.
I've got the figures here. 5,000 out of 32,600 Metropolitan Police officers are from a black, Asian and minority ethnic background. Now, that's the highest in the Met's history. It's 15.4%. So I think that is progress. But if you look at the demographic makeup of London, it doesn't reflect that, does it?
Correct.
Right, thank you very much indeed, Alison, for your question. Let's move on to James in Hitchin. Hello, James.
Good evening. My question is, will the London mayors have a word campaign improve relationships between men and women?
Just explain what the Have a Word campaign is.
My understanding is that the idea is that to reduce particularly low-level sexism and misogyny, men are going to kind of challenge each other, to sort of step in and say that's not appropriate, with a view to stopping women feeling threatened. That's my understanding.
James, let's come to you first.
I saw this for the first time today. And, at first I get a bit sceptical with these sort of semi-naff-acted adverts. But then I thought about it and I was like, the issue here is toxic masculinity, in my opinion. Men need to recognise that how they behave around women is completely unacceptable. And, growing up in Dorset in quite a sports-based environment, I see how you can get to a point when you're 20 years old and you behave in a way that's perhaps, not very acceptable. And I think what we have to do is we have to be acknowledging when we're younger, when we are teenagers. I saw this on YouTube on an advert about shoes. So, the people that's targeting are guys of my age and younger. That's when we have to tap into this, because we have to unpick those sort of gender constructs and that stereotype of what we presume in society a man should be, strong and bulletproof and emotionless. We have to change that narrative, be more emotional, and then that is the way that we're going to hopefully reduce this toxicity that men feel to, and also that kind of strive to be that type of man that just doesn't fit in a present-day society.
It is interesting, when these campaigns are launched, there's a huge media interest in them. I think the Scottish police did something similar a few months ago, and it got a tremendous amount of coverage and a tremendous amount of views, the YouTube video. But Catherine, I wonder whether you think that they look good, these campaigns. They may make the politicians who launch them feel better about actually doing something, but does this get to the core of the problem?
I did watch one of them, which was the one when they're in the shop and they come out and they start basically harassing a girl who's just sat on her own waiting for her friend on the park bench outside the shop. And I just thought that can just happen. But the way it was done, I thought was very clever. And what we're doing is what is trying to be done is to, the whole relationship between men and women, and when it goes wrong, it's on a spectrum, isn't it? Because if you think it's okay to sort of treat a girl like that outside the shop, then, in the worst case scenario, you might end up thinking it's okay after a party just to sort of barge into her flat and then to take your liberty and all the rest of it. And that's how we end up with the really high rates of unfortunately sexual assault that we've got at the moment. They are going up, and also 1 in 75 of these chaps is brought to justice. That's terrible, isn't it?
I was going to say, and that's the problem, isn't it, Catherine? The conviction rate is appalling.
Dreadful.
Really appalling.
1 in 75. That means 74 girls are out there thinking, I don't matter.
That's right.
My whole life's been turned up.
And those are the ones that report it.
Yeah, exactly. And it's taking 2 years to come to court.
Yeah. And they keep saying they're going to get this sorted, and the police, they don't.
It's been years now.
Yeah,
and we've gone through about we've been through 3 Secretary of State for Justice. Dominic Raab has promised to put it right, but I just think 1 in 75. Yeah.
I think, this is important for me because the onus is on us as men. There's so much victim blaming, or there has been for generations, and that's, whilst the adverts are, whatever, I think that they are encouraging us as men to recognise it's our problem, not the victim's problem. So for that reason, I think these things are great.
Robert.
Just quickly to come back before Robert does. Sorry, I've got on a favourite topic now, just to say that I think there are repeat offenders. Mm-hmm. And the message is, if you don't get convicted, just go and do it again. Yeah. Because nothing will happen. And I'm afraid I've had people say, well, this young person has been assaulted, took over 2 years for it to be even come to court. It was no further action in the end. And basically the message is, go and get your brothers and your cousins to go around and beat him up, because that's the only thing. And then we're getting into a very dangerous area of vigilantism, which we don't want to go down.
Right. Well, I think we're all in agreement, aren't we? We want to bring up young men to take responsibility and to treat women appropriately. I suppose the only caveat I would say is that these campaigns are often produced by politicians instead of trying to tackle the hardest questions of all, like Sadiq Khan getting London's police force under control, or the government here in Westminster trying to reduce the amount of time it takes to bring a rape case to trial. So I do think that politicians should try to focus on the most important elements that are within their control on these issues.
Great stuff. Right, we will take another of your questions in just a moment. 0345 6060 973. It's 8:48.
LBC. Nick Ferrari at breakfast.
Lord Harrington, who's Minister for Refugees. After 6 months, the great British people who open their hearts and open their doors, are they meant to say to these folk, that's it, you must go?
They've been given a right to remain here for 3 years. That makes them entitled to all of the benefits that we are. Education, health, right to work.
Including housing, Lord Harrington?
Yes, including housing.
I don't need to tell you, there's pressure on housing, isn't there?
And this is a big problem, and that's why in the first instance we're asking the British public to step forward, which they have.
Nick Ferrari at breakfast. Back tomorrow morning from 7. Listen on your radio and on Global Player. LBC. Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC.
8:52 on LBC. Catherine West, Robert Jenrick, James Brittain-McVey and Andrew Pearce are with me. Let me just read this text out from Helen. It's in response to the last question that we had. She says, I was raped 30 years ago and my uncle, who was a barrister, told me not to bother reporting it because I'd been drinking in a pub and the defence lawyer would tear me apart. I'm still haunted by his face to this day and it's affected my life and relationships. I imagine there are many instances of sexual assault which aren't reported and the problem is bigger than it seems. A terrible, terrible experience to go through, Helen, and you will be one of many, many women who've gone through something like that over the last 30 years and have done exactly what you did. And you sound to me as if you're kind of blaming yourself for taking that advice. You shouldn't at all, because I think it was probably actually well-meant advice in a way, but you would hope that things had changed in the last 30 years, but you have to wonder sometimes. Right, let's go to our next question. It's a text from Sarah in Brighton. Are we building enough housing for poorer people? Why has affordable housing replaced social housing? Well, former Housing Secretary Robert Jenrick, it's all your fault.
Well, I don't think we're building enough housing of any type in this country. That's the reality. Last year we built more homes than we've built in any year for almost 30 years, but we're still miles off.
How many was that?
It was 250,000 homes, or just below that level. But we need to build far more homes than that.
But what obstacles, as Housing Secretary, did you face? Because you were the Cabinet Minister responsible. You think, well, if you can't get it done, who can?
Well, what I tried to do when I was in the role was to relentlessly push for the building of more homes, to approve developments, to make the planning system much simpler, to put more investment into affordable housing, which we have done. Actually, we have the largest affordable housing programme that we've ever done since we came to power in 2010 at least. But I'm afraid there is a great deal of resistance from existing homeowners. You saw, I thought, a particularly telling example last week where there was a development that was going to be built on top of a station in North London. 40% of the homes were going to be affordable. It was next to transport infrastructure on a brownfield site, and yet still the development was turned down. And when you see things like that happening, I despair, because I think we're never going to solve this problem unless we're all much more grown up and say that we are willing to have homes built in our area, that as a Member of Parliament we are willing to see development in our own constituencies, and it's only then that we'll get close to fixing them.
You wanted to reform the planning system, and a lot of your colleagues were, shall we say, rather horrible about your desires on that, weren't they? And really tried to scupper it.
Well, we managed to do a number of the reforms, but you're right to say we didn't manage to do nearly as many as we would have liked to, and that was because there was significant opposition in Parliament. And I found that it was a bit like, it was everyone was willing to contemplate it in theory, but not in practice in their own constituency. And that included people like Theresa May, who had said that she wanted her premiership to be about fixing the housing problem, but she wasn't willing to have a few homes built in Maidenhead. So it is, I'm afraid, a bit depressing, but I do think it's a soluble problem, but we simply need to have the political will to tackle it, and that means all of us, including those of us who are homeowners, being willing to see some homes built in our own area in order to help the next generation onto the ladder.
Catherine?
I think of the homes that are being built, more of them need to be genuinely affordable, which means about a third of market rent, because that's about what people can afford. So that's normally what social housing is, i.e. council housing, which is actually really popular, by the way, across the piece. And when I was a borough leader, we built more council homes. We did a lot of infill sites where you've got a sort of a nasty bit where everyone dumps their rubbish, put up a few terraces. Now, you think that doesn't add up, but if you do that plus big schemes, so I was there when we did the Arsenal scheme, we got 750 social homes, and immediately we dealt with the top 10 or 15% most needy families who needed wheelchair access and lifts and things. It was all lovely and modern. But you need those schemes in different parts, not just in North London. You need them everywhere, because in the end you're going to run out of land here. But there is quite a lot of land banking going on as well, and we have to say that the developers, they need to play their part. We've seen business change in some regards and become a bit more progressive on certain things. We need to push them about the land banking, because they always say, we haven't got planning permission, but when you look at it, the Local Government Association says we haven't got a lot of applications waiting. It's the developers waiting until the price is right, and then suddenly they'll build a few and then get their money in, and so on and so forth. So, yes, we have a problem.
Andrew?
I'll just say one word, NIMBYs. That's part of the problem. We've been around since the 80s, 90s to 2000s, and Robert knows that his proposal that he was trying to do was seen off by Tory MPs who did not want housing estates built on their green constituency.
Nor does your newspaper, does it?
Probably not. No, but we do argue that we've got to see more homes built, but we want to ask more on brownfield sites.
When I was proposing to reform the planning system, actually, the Daily Mail was very fair on this issue.
Supportive.
But you're right, it is NIMBYs.
Didn't it cost you your job?
Hold the front page, Daily Mail fair.
Didn't it cost him his job?
Look, I don't know. I do think it's one of those issues where if you look back in 5 or 10 years' time, I'll be proven to be right. You're on the right side of history if you're trying to build more homes and help more people onto the housing ladder for the whole country and for the Conservative Party, because the Conservative Party's future rests on people having a stake in society.
James?
I'd be interested in hearing what the technical percentage of affordable homes has to be in new blocks, because where I live, there's been a process over the last 6 years where they've pulled down loads of big high-rise blocks of flats that have been there for 20, 30 years. So I imagine the people in there probably can't afford to be buying new properties in that area. So they're getting rid of these like thousands of flats and then replacing them with something that's probably, I don't know, 30 or less percent affordable homes. So these people are just having to leave London, especially with the cost of living increasing. I think we're just getting to a point where all these areas, people are just getting squeezed and pushed out, and new people are coming in, and I think that's a real shame. But it's not my area of expertise, I have to say.
Well, you're doing very well. Jessica in Clapham says, James recently spoke out about body image and mental health. Why are we still putting people under so much pressure about how they look? James?
Tough one. I'm part of something with Dr. Luke Evans MP, where we're trying to encourage companies, when they advertise products or things, to use models that represent the norm in society.
What is the norm?
Well, I know what isn't the norm, which is people with 5% body fat that are shredded, that have had their pictures doctored. So I think,
like Andrew Pearce.
Well,
cruel.
Look at him, a god. But I think that's
one of the things. Twitter profile now.
That's one of the things that I would like to see, and I think there is that pressure there. You go on Instagram and you scroll and you see pictures that are edited and don't represent people. You go on TikTok, and whatever age you are, you can modify your cheekbones and the colour of your eyes and the whiteness of your teeth. So I'd love to see companies and brands changing the people, the influencers that they want.
And are they showing any willingness to do that?
I think they'll have to if we can get legislation in place where people have to declare whether pictures have been doctored. I think, though, the reality is, we look at TikTok, that's been a relatively recent app, and they've got this whole section called like enhancement, which is implying that you can make yourself better, and that's a new app. That's not something that's been around forever, so I think there's still a way to go for sure.
I'm on TikTok. I'll have to make sure I access that bit of the app. Do any of you have any comments on this? No, you don't. Right, let's have our final fun text question. Again, surrounding James. James McVey was on I'm a Celeb. This is from Jeanette in Ruislip. His bandmate has been on Dancing on Ice. Which reality TV show would you most like to appear on, Andrew Pearce?
It has to be Strictly. I'd love it. I want to wear the sequins.
That was the most predictable answer of the night, frankly, wasn't it? Catherine?
I think the Bake Off. I think I'm quite like to go on.
You a good cook?
Yeah, I think that'd be great fun.
Yeah.
Robert?
Oh, I think Strictly, or one of those celebrity antique shows, because I like a bit of a rummage round antique shops at a weekend.
So, James, you were...
Probably easier to get on that than Strictly.
You were on I'm a Celeb. Which other one might you fancy?
I would have done The Weakest Link, but I think it's gone, hasn't it, now? I'd like sort of like,
It's never the same since I was going to say Anne Diamond, Anne Robinson. Yeah. I'd fancy Celebrity Hunted. Jackie Smith and I are making a pitch to do that together, but I suspect we're not celeb enough, but there we go.
Yes. Listen, didn't work out well for Kay Burley.
Let's not go there. Her and Johnny Mercer. What a potential couple. Yes. Right. On that bombshell, Robert, thank you. James, Catherine, Andrew, thank you for joining us on Cross Question. If you missed any of tonight's show, want to catch up on previous episodes, you can do so on Global Player, and indeed you can watch tonight's show back right now. But in the meantime, we are going to be talking about Tony Blair and Joe Biden in the next hour, because Tony Blair has launched a bit of an attack on Joe Biden. He's criticised his strange tactic of promising not to fight Russia. Do you agree with Tony Blair? I suspect there'll be many of you thinking, I don't agree with Tony Blair on anything, but on this, he might have a point. 0345 6060 973. You're listening to LBC. I'm Iain Dale. It's 9:02.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
Leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 9 o'clock. Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe will arrive back in the UK tonight after almost 6 years of detention in Iran. The British-Iranian national was arrested on spying charges in 2016, something she's always denied.